Michael Ashcroft was appointed Treasurer of the Conservative Party in 1998 by William Hague. His tenure was marked by a number of controversies. He was seen to pay little UK income tax due to his domicile in Belize, and he was at the centre of a debate about openness and accountability of political funding. I campaigned for the party treasurer to be elected by and accountable to party members. At the Central Council meeting of the party in October 1999, I moved a motion accordingly. It was heavily defeated. Unsubstantiated speculation about Ashcroft's business affairs came to a head when he pursued a libel action against the Times.
William Hague promised a new start. He dumped people associated with John Major, he ditched policies associated with John Major, but he hasn't managed to make that issue that haunted John Major disappear. So by taking the Times to court, Michael Ashcroft and his party are certainly showing that they're fighting back. But the risks are enormous, almost irrespective of the outcome of the case, almost irrespective of the truth. A drawn-out legal battle might only reinforce the link in voters' minds between the Tories and sleaze. William Hague's doing just that. He says Michael Ashcroft doesn't need to appear before the party's ethics committee.
Something warm to come to when nights are cold and lonely.
There was not a long discussion because Mr. Ashcroft said he had nothing to answer for. So therefore, why should we discuss it or, at the very least, even consider referring it to the subcommittee?
The committee at the moment is turned into a toothless wonder. It would appear that unless allegations are proved, nothing can be referred to it. But if allegations are proved, then you don't need to refer to the committee anyway.
It's a twin-pronged strategy. Defend Michael Ashcroft to the hilt and attack those attacking him. Take on the Times in the courts and take on Peter Bradley, the MP who's been helping them with their inquiries. Go for the process rather than the substance of the allegations. But the waters are muddy already. Who can forget Formula One? Who can forget that mortgage? Who can forget that other tax exile? Labour claims it's learnt its lesson. When it comes to the Tories, minds invariably wander back to Tatton, to cash for questions, libel writs and ultimately defeat. Purists say there's a simple solution: strict laws on who can give what to parties and what they can do with their money. Next week, Parliament's presented with a draft bill based on proposals from the Committee on Standards in Public Life. Even the odd Tory says that won't go far enough.
I'd also like to see actually a cap on the amount of any individual donation. Now, that isn't in the Neil Committee proposals, but it does seem to me that once you start giving sums of money in excess of £100,000, then there's some question mark as to why you should be doing it.
So even if William Hague does what his troops want him to do and tough this one out, and even if Michael Ashcroft keeps his job, will that really be it? Or will the Ashcroft case force the Tories to open themselves up to greater scrutiny and persuade the government to introduce reforms of party funding more radical than previously envisaged?
Well, in our Manchester studio, but in different rooms, is the former MP for Tatton, Neil Hamilton, and the man who unseated him, the current MP, Martin Bell. Martin Bell, what do you think the Conservative Party should do about Michael Ashcroft?
I think because it's got this ethics committee, it would do itself an enormous favour to activate it. The problem is not really with Michael Ashcroft. The problem is with parties who are spending more money than they can safely raise. If you're spending £20 million on an election, you're not going to get that from the rank and file ordinary membership. You're going to big contributors. And then people are going to ask, what are they buying with this? Are they buying a change of policy? Is there a suspicion of buying peerages? What we're talking about here is the old issue of public trust, and it's in the Conservatives' own interest, and for that matter the Labour Party, to get it right.
You say more money than they can raise. Well, next week, we don't know if the government's going to accept it, but we'll find out next week whether they accept Lord Neil's recommendation on funding, which is that there should be a limit of 20 million.
I think that's absurdly generous. You cannot safely raise 20 million. you can safely raise, I think, 2 million, or at the most 5 million. That is with modest contributions from people who believe in the party. Above that, you're going to the big donors, and that's where the suspicions of influence buying and influence selling will always remain.
So what's the overall limit?
I think you can run an effective election campaign for 2 million. What have you got to do? You fly your leaders about the country, have a small group of spin doctors, maybe not thousands. You have to put together your campaign commercials. The airtime is free. You don't need a single billboard. The Conservatives spent £11 million on billboards last time. Waste of money. I think you can do it much more cheaply, and with cheaper politics becomes clearly more honest politics.
But seriously, an effective national campaign, you're cutting down the Tories last time 28 million to £2 million?
Well, I think it can be done. I think it needs to be done in the interests of public trust and confidence in the process.
OK, in the short term, as far as the Conservatives are concerned, do you think it would make a difference, this proposal put forward today, if their Treasurer were elected rather than appointed?
It might be more democratic. I have no particular problem, as a matter of fact, with Mr. Ashcroft as the Conservative Party chairman. I do have a problem with Mr. Ashcroft as a major contributor, in the same way as I had a problem with Bernie Ecclestone as a major contributor. It's more money than any party should be receiving from any one benefactor.
Neil Hamilton, do you think the Tories just haven't learnt how to handle sleaze allegations?
Well, what sleaze allegations are you making against Michael Ashcroft?
Well,
now, Martin Bell said at the beginning of his remarks that the Ethics and Integrity Committee of the Conservative Party ought to be activated. I haven't heard any accusation as yet of Michael Ashcroft acting in an unethical way.
But Neil Hamilton, you of anybody should know that it doesn't matter what the facts are, it's the perception.
Oh, I see, so the reality doesn't matter.
No,
it's what newspapers say that matters.
But in purely political, pragmatic terms, it's the perception of sleaze.
Well, I'm interested in truth and justice, not perversions and allegations. And a newspaper like The Times, which is owned by a billionaire tax exile, who even changed his nationality in order to further his commercial advantage, because he could only grab a larger slice of the American media if he did so, is not actually the most secure foundation upon which to fling accusations of an inchoate nature against Michael Ashcroft out day after day after day. This is a political assassination
Neil Hamilton,
squad.
please, let us put those allegations. We are not talking about the specific allegations that Times have made and other people have made against Michael Ashcroft. We are purely talking about what parties should do when they come across this problem. It is not going to go away. How about this proposal? Do you agree with Martin Bell that there should be a limit perhaps of 2 million on campaign funds?
Well, I don't believe that any system can be constructed which is going to avoid parties seeking money and is going to avoid people wanting to give it for whatever reason.
So you mean even if there was a limit of £2 million, parties would go over it?
I mean, there are limits in the United States which are much lower than that. And yet we've seen all sorts of ways which have been found around them with political action committees and so on and so forth. All you will do is drive it underground, which will give more and more opportunity for unscrupulous representatives of the media, like the Slimes, to invent allegations, to make inchoate allegations, in fact, because they've never actually made them concrete against Michael Ashcroft, and so will increase the opportunity for people to reduce the view of the reputation of people in public life.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to...
The courts will ultimately decide the Ashcroft affair, but as far as this funding is concerned, what about a cap on individual donations?
Well, I've said I don't think that this will work, because there are ways in which anybody who wants to get around the rules will do so.
But that suggests that we should never trust our politicians, so it's no surprise.
I mean, I just look at what happens around the world, and in the United States, where they've become most paranoid about political funding. Although there's a very, very low limit to what any individual can give. I think it's as low as $10,000, if I remember correctly. Nevertheless, tens of millions of dollars flow, hundreds of millions of dollars flow into the coffers of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in any election. Where does that come from? It doesn't come from ordinary Joe Soaps.
Neil Hamilton, thank you very much. We shall leave it there. Martin Bell, just before you go, there have been a lot of calls for Michael Ashcroft to stand down to prevent further damage to the Conservative Party, perception of even. Do you think he should?
I'm quite happy to leave it to the Conservative Party. I thought the letter from the former British High Commissioner to Belize was fairly damaging. If they're happy with that, I'm not going to second-guess them, but they do have this mechanism for something. It's never yet been used, and primarily, it's there to protect them. I think they should use it.
Martin Bell, Neil Hamilton, thank you both very much.
The libel action was settled on 9th December 1999 when the Times issued a front-page statement saying, "The Times is pleased to confirm that it has no evidence that Mr. Ashcroft or any of his companies have ever been suspected of money laundering or drug-related crimes. Litigation between the parties has been settled to mutual satisfaction, with each side bearing its own costs."
As well as its treasurer. He lives and works in Belize but holds a British passport. He's been dogged by media reports about the legitimacy of his donations and his business interests in Belize. Throughout, the Conservative leader has stood by him, insisting Mr. Ashcroft's unusual situation breaks no parliamentary rules. Mr. Ashcroft started a libel action against the Times, accusing it of implying he was under investigation for drug running and money laundering. Today, that case has been dropped by mutual consent and no money has been exchanged. The Times says it has no evidence of such crimes. Mr. Ashcroft says he intends to reorganise his affairs and return to live in Britain. But critics say the matter can't rest there.
Mr. Hague has got to make up his mind as to whether he wants to lead a serious political party or whether he wants to allow it to be, or at least to seem to be, the plaything of a man who's made a great deal of money and now seems not just to run the party but to own it.
Certainly a high-profile libel action has now been avoided. The Conservative Party so far have made no comment, apart from a brief statement from the party chairman, Michael Ancram. He said, "I'm delighted that the Times has settled this action with Michael Ashcroft, and the Times no longer makes damaging allegations against him. I welcome the fact that they will now draw a line under the Ashcroft affair." It seems that both sides in this case have met in the middle. Neither is admitting that they blinked first. But it's not yet clear if the settlement with the Times will put to an end questions about whether Mr. Ashcroft's behaviour has been appropriate and whether his wealth has led to undue influence over the Conservative Party. Carolyn Quinn, BBC News,
By the
Westminster.
Conservative Party treasurer Michael Ashcroft against the Times newspaper has been settled. The paper confirmed it has no evidence that the Belize-based businessman or any of his companies have ever been suspected of drug trafficking or money laundering. It's also revealed that because of public concern over foreign donations to political parties, Mr. Ashcroft intends to return to live in Britain. Well, I'm joined in the studio by John Stafford, chairman of the Campaign for Conservative Democracy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, Michael Ashcroft is no doubt going to be relieved about this, but is it actually going to draw a line under the whole affair?
Well, it will draw a line under this part of the affair, and I'm delighted that the legal action has been settled. I'm delighted that Michael Ashcroft's coming back. The UK taxpayers will be better off because presumably he'll be paying tax here. But what hasn't drawn a line under is the principle of democratic accountability, and that's what I've been fighting for in the Conservative Party. We should, in a modern political party, have a treasurer who is elected by the membership and accountable to the membership. That is critical, and it is one of the things that the Conservative Party has yet to do.
Because William Hague has stood by him all through this. Has he been right to do so?
Well, I don't know whether he's right or wrong. I mean, I've not been arguing particularly about the case of Michael Ashcroft in particular. It has just highlighted the problem of not having democratic accountability within the party. It is up to the party members if they wish to choose somebody with his background as treasurer.
Because we had a Labour MP on the programme this morning who said that William Hague has basically got to make up his mind whether he's running a serious party or whether he's going to be the plaything of a man who's made a great deal of money, and he seems not just to run the party but to own it now.
Well, the Labour Party really, I mean, that is quite extraordinary. I mean, if I was not campaigning for conservative democracy, I would be attacking the Labour Party because they are the most undemocratic political party in the Western world. But with the trade union bloc votes, I mean, it really does make me furious when I get these kind of people coming up with stuff like that.
But the fact remains that the Tory party has, as its treasurer, a man who has given an awful lot of money to the party since the general election.
Yes, and I think that the party ought to distinguish between the fundraising side of the party and the income and expenditure treasurership of the party. We used to have a Chinese wall in the 80s and beforehand between those two functions. That Chinese wall ought to be brought back.
But do you think the Tories would actually be better off without Michael Ashcroft as its treasurer?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think that he has got to decide either stand for election as treasurer or be on the fundraising side. I don't think you can do both.
There is going to be pressure, though, still for him to go, isn't there?
Oh, I don't know. Who from?
You tell me.
Well, you made a statement.
But I mean, Ashcroft is coming, he says that he's coming back to reorganise his affairs, to return to live in Britain. Is that actually going to change anything at all?
Well, it will change if he decides, and I hope that we will have genuine elections for the treasurership. Not only the treasurership, the party chairman should be elected too. Because what we've got to do is to create a party which is appealing to the mass of the British people. That means that you've got to go for small donations, little donations, nothing's too small, rather than these big donors. Big donors put off ordinary people, and we want to create a party with mass membership. We want to start reversing the trends in declining membership and start going for the mass membership which is necessary for us to win the next election.
Listen to William Hague with a series of questions about the Conservative Party treasurer, Michael Ashcroft. Mr. Ashcroft has given £2 million to the Tories, but Labour says as he's a citizen of a foreign country, he shouldn't be financing a British political party. Tonight, Mr. Ashcroft said he was the victim of a media smear. Our political correspondent John Pienaar reports.
A rare moment in the spotlight for Michael Ashcroft. The billionaire businessman addresses the Tory party conference 5 years ago, even then a big money donor. But by 1997, he was William Hague's choice of party treasurer. The £1 million donor in the background also happened to be a dual Belize British citizen, the man sent by Belize and not Britain to be ambassador to the United Nations. Labour's made him a target.
Mr. Ashcroft, whatever his origins, doesn't live here anymore, he doesn't vote here. His interests are not in the United Kingdom. So how does Mr. Hague square all of that with what he says is his attitude to party funding?
William Hague banned foreign donations. So what about Mr. Ashcroft?
Mr. Hague, are you standing by your treasurer? I'm going to question time. Thanks very much.
The Tories want this row to go away. William Hague denies Michael Ashcroft has ever bought political influence, and he supports a legal ban on foreign donations. In Belize, Mr. Ashcroft owns interests worth millions and his own bank. This small Central American country is better known for tourism than business, but here he's a big figure. Some diplomats raised doubts about his business reputation, but the Foreign Office fought to protect his interests in Belize. Today, the Foreign Office said it would have done the same for any Briton whose interests were at stake, but the attacks picked up pace. In the Commons, the Prime Minister agreed with one MP who saw this as a case for Lord Neil's Committee on Public Standards.
Madam Speaker, of course, the Neil Committee is there and available for such matters to be dealt with, and I'm sure they will be.
Some Tories have doubts too.
I don't know whether Michael Ashcroft is guilty of anything at all, but suddenly we've got back into the headlines the whole issue of overseas residents and big donations and tax avoidance.
Tonight, there's no sign of Michael Ashcroft at the home he bought recently, a short walk from Tory headquarters. But he's issued a statement accusing his critics of smearing him with no evidence of wrongdoing to back it up. That won't deter those who believe it's a mistake for any party to depend too heavily on one figure, let alone one so controversial. John Pienaar, BBC News at Michael Ashcroft.
Virtually every treasurer of the Conservative Party ends up in the House of Lords. Ashcroft was no exception. In March 2000, he became Baron Ashcroft of Chichester.
An affront to the Conservative Party and to Parliament. That's just one of the criticisms of the decision to give a life peerage to the Conservative Party treasurer, Michael Ashcroft. And it comes not from the opposition, but from the former Tory leader in the Lords, Viscount Cranborne. Mr. Ashcroft, who's donated and lent millions of pounds to the Conservatives, will be made a life peer on condition that he ends his tax exile in Belize. He was refused the honour last year when there was controversy over his business dealings. Our political correspondent Laura Trevelyan is at Westminster. Laura.
Well, Anna, as you say, Michael Ashcroft is the millionaire businessman whose money has effectively helped keep the Conservative Party afloat since the last election. Despite being turned down for a peerage last year, he's now finally been rewarded for his fundraising efforts. A congratulatory bouquet was delivered to Michael Ashcroft's Westminster house this morning, but there was no sign of the man himself. He's abroad. He'll have to take up residence in the UK before the end of the year, though, because that's the string the Honours Committee has attached to his peerage. Mr. Ashcroft will be a contented man today. Despite all the controversy about his business interests, at long last, the Tory party treasurer has the peerage he's coveted. Responsible for giving an estimated £3 million to the party since the last election, he's now a member of the establishment that's shunned him in the past. Tory party leadership figures are pleased too. They feel they've seen off concerted attacks from the media and the Labour Party over their choice of treasurer.
He's been funding the Conservative Party to the tune of 10% over the course of the last few years. Compare that with a government minister at the heart of government making policy, Lord Sainsbury, who last year gave a Labour Party £2 million, and nobody raised an eyebrow.
But there's disquiet in the Tory ranks about this appointment. Lord Cranborne, the former leader of the party in the Lords, called it an affront to the dignity and standing of the party in Parliament and said it was unprecedented for conditions to be set before anyone can become a peer. What's caused the concern is Mr Ashcroft's business interests in Belize and elsewhere. One newspaper alleged that he might have been linked to criminal activity, a suggestion it later withdrew. But some in the party still say he shouldn't have a peerage.
I hope that the fact that he's made these big donations over the last 2 or 3 years to the party has got nothing to do with the fact that he has been given a peerage. Because if it does, then it means that we have gone back to the days of Lloyd George.
Members of the Lords are appointed by a scrutiny committee. Downing Street today denied that the Prime Minister had any role in approving Mr Ashcroft's elevation, saying he just forwards names to the committee. Observers say the fuss over Mr Ashcroft is convenient for Labour.
Mr Blair's created over 200 peers since he's been in office, over a quarter of the current House of Lords. Now surely these powers ought to be taken away from the Prime Minister, as the Wakeham report advocates.
William Hague will be hoping the controversy over Michael Ashcroft subsides. Now he's to be a peer of the realm. Well, Anna, what the Ashcroft affair really raises is the question of how political parties these days are really dependent on big business to fund them, a practice that often leads to questions being asked. Anna.
Laura, thank you.
When about 3 million Britons...
Michael Ashcroft didn't take up UK residence. It was not until 1st of March 2010 that Ashcroft admitted that he was not domiciled in the UK for tax purposes. Throughout the period up to the general election of 2010, Lord Ashcroft's tax status and political activity kept popping up in the news. He financed the marginal seats in the 2005 and the 2010 general election. He is now the owner of the website conservativehome.com. Over the years, I have come to admire him. He is the only party treasurer who, after getting his peerage, has continued to support the Conservative Party both financially and in other ways. Controversy over the party treasurer has continued. Until we have a treasurer elected by and accountable to the party members, it will continue to keep popping up.